Popular culture doesn't generally associate Japan with knitting and woolly sweaters. When people this side of the international date line think Japan, they think about beautiful kimonos and sushi. They might think about samurai and Zen gardens. But we knitters, of course, know that Japan is home to the famous Noro yarns that are so colorful and beautiful. And the ever popular ranunculus sweater was designed by a Japanese knitting designer, Midori Hirose. Well, as I came to see on my recent 3-week trip to Japan, knitting and yarn crafts are very, very popular in that country. And I am so excited to share with you my yarn journey in Japan. Today, we start with Tokyo. Hi, I'm Melanie, and you're watching Yarn Journeys. I am a knitter, a spinner, and a sometime sewist. I live in Arlington, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. If you are a returning viewer, welcome back. And if you are new to my channel, I am so glad you found me. So here's what's up for today's episode. First, we're going to talk Japanese knitting and yarn crafts. And I'm going to take you with me on a crawl through Tokyo's yarn shops. We'll look at some yarn, and I'll also share with you what I brought home with me. Then I'm going to share with you some footage of Tokyo that I took while visiting there. And then, as always, I will do a show and tell of the progress on my projects. So with no further ado, let's talk Japanese knitting. Knitting has been popular in Japan for much longer than I thought, or at least I thought before I did some research in preparation for my trip to Japan. From what I could tell, historians believe that the yarn craft was brought to Japan by Portuguese traders in the 16th century. The domestic manufacture of yarn and knitting tools for hand knitters in Japan began in the 20th century. Clover, which is a brand you are likely familiar with. They make these delightful row counters. You may be using their stitch holders or their crochet hooks. That company was founded in the 1920s. Daruma Yarns, a famous Japanese manufacturer of yarn for hand knitters, started in 1901. Hamanaka Yarns, which is very popular in many yarn shops across Japan, dates from the 1950s. And of course, there are those wonderful patterns by Japanese designers that show up all the time in Ravelry's Hot Right Now, like the aforementioned ranunculus or the drawing sweater. Japanese knitting design is amazingly beautiful, often whimsical, and has a sense of style and fashion to it that I feel is unique. As you can imagine, when I started planning a trip to Japan with my husband, I was super excited to dive into Japanese yarn and knitting culture. So, as I mentioned earlier, in today's episode, we're going to go on a yarn crawl to some Tokyo knitting shops. A little bit about how I find yarn shops to visit on my travels. First, I rely a lot on Ravelry's yarn shop directory. So when you go to Ravelry's yarn page, you can enter into their directory search spot where you're going to visit, and they will tell you the names of yarn shops that are located in a particular spot. Of course, you then are relying on the yarn shop owners to create a page in Ravelry, or when people stash yarn, to mention where they bought it. Another very useful way to research yarn shops on travels is Google Maps. And that is how I found some yarn shops that are not that familiar to Western visitors to Japan. And that was super cool. Our first stop will be to Odakaya Shinjuku. Odakaya is a craft store with a focus really on sewing or garment creation. It actually reminded me most of Joann's, but much better than my local Joann's by a long shot. The Shinjuku Odakaya store had several floors, and the fifth floor is dedicated to yarn crafts. It was full of yarn of various weights and materials, and of many different provenances. There was a fantastic selection of crochet cotton. And in fact, if you crochet, this was a wonderful spot to get tools and patterns and yarn specifically for crochet. In fact, if I may, crochet seemed to me as popular, if not more so, than knitting in Japan, depending on where you were. I saw a lot more space dedicated to crochet in yarn shops than I'm used to seeing here in the US. Most of the brands I saw there were from domestic Japanese manufacturer, although they will say where the wool comes from. So there's wool from Australia, wool that is imported from England, but it is, you can tell from the way the ball bands look, it is marketed specifically for the Japanese market. I did spot some European brands like Rowan there, but for the most part, the yarns I saw were Japanese. Odakaya, curiously, was the only yarn shop I saw that had Noro yarns. Here in the US, when we visit a yarn shop, Noro is like the preeminent Japanese yarn that I feel we see here. But from what I could tell in Japan, Noro is only a small fraction of the yarns that are available to buy there. What I bought in this shop, Odakaya Shinjuku, was some Noro. It was a lot cheaper to buy in Japan than in the US. I'm not sure exactly how much cheaper, but I know that it was much cheaper. So I got 2 skeins of Noro silk garden. I am not sure what I am going to make with this. If you're not familiar with Noro silk garden, it is a combination of silk, mohair, and wool. And I'd say it is kind of a DK worsted weight, but it is a single. And it's super pretty. I think these two will look nice together in some kind of a fade. So stay tuned. Our second stop is to the Tokyo branch of Walnut, the yarn store that is owned by Amirisu. You may be familiar with Amirisu as the magazine that features the patterns of both Japanese and Western designers. Walnut was fascinating to me because it really felt like this place that was making connections between cutting edge Japanese knitwear design and the cutting edge of Western yarns. So I saw a lot of the fancier Western yarn brands. There was La Bien-Aimée, Brooklyn Tweed, Retro Saria, yarns we associate with famous designers, breed-specific wool, and frankly, yarn that's on the more expensive side. But Amirisu and Walnut also feature Japanese yarns such as Daruma. And Amirisu also has hand-dyed yarns. That was familiar to me in that it reminded me of the hand-dyed yarns that you might see at a fiber festival, for example. I am going to talk more about Amirisu in particular in my next episode where I visit Kyoto. But it was here at this Walnut, this Tokyo outpost of Amirisu, where I was really able to see how connections are being made between trends in Japanese knitting and Western yarns. And of course, I had to bring home something with me. So I got some Amirisu hand-dyed. Not surprising, the colorway is familiar to me. So this is Hike, which is 100% merino, and it's about a sport or a DK weight. And I just love this sort of dusty, cool pink that this beautiful yarn is featuring. I just love this cool mauvey pink. And for a bit of a brighter shot of color, I got this Trek hand-dyed. This one is, let me see here, once again, 100% merino. This is more of a fingering weight. I just love this hot color, this hot pink. And then for a little bit of a departure for me, I got this flow hand-dyed. Now this is a lace weight combination of alpaca, cashmere, and silk. And it is just so soft. I'm not usually a fan of this kind of acidy yellow, but in combination with this hot pink, I was mesmerized, and well, it just had to come home with me. So very pretty stuff at Walnut. Our third stop on our Tokyo yarn crawl is Puppy. So of course, when I heard there was a yarn shop called Puppy, how could I not go? I mean, puppies and yarn, two of my favorite things. So I was sure to visit this shop. It's actually in Setagaya, which is a neighborhood a little bit further out from the main downtown areas that most tourists visit. But it was definitely worth the time to go. Uh, this yarn shop, I definitely got a different vibe than the other ones I had visited. Puppy features both Japanese yarns as well as Western yarns. And what I saw there was that this place was all about texture. When I visited, there was a knitters meetup or a gathering there, and it was kind of fun to go in and see a bunch of knitters around a table enjoying each other's company. You know, uh, they kind of were looking at me like, how did you get here? Because I don't think they're used to seeing all that many Westerners visiting the shop. Maybe they do, I don't know. But they had a fair bit of Rowan yarns and Katya yarns. These, of course, are well known in the West. But Puppy also has its own brand of yarns. And the hallmark to me of that yarn was the interesting textures. There was a lot of inclusion of silk and mercerized cotton, shiny kind of materials, shiny perhaps acrylic or polyester filaments. There was a lot of sparkle there, which is always fun. Things made with nylon. Of course, I had to get some. I fell in love with, yes, it's red, this Puppy Yarns new Volo. So how do I explain what this is? It's probably like an Aran or bulky weight, and it's very stretchy. There is no wool in it. This is 100%, let's see, what does it say? Well, it actually, the yarn band is all, it's all in Japanese. So, yeah. But if, when I play with it like this, it almost has a feeling like it's made of twisted up nylons. And when I mean nylons, I mean like hosiery nylon. And it's very squishy, very bouncy. And what I think this would be perfect for is to make a knitted market bag. It strikes me as being fairly strong so long as you knit it at the right gauge. I don't think I would make a garment out of this. In the store, they had samples of crochet slippers and a small crochet bag made with this. I have two more skeins, and I'd like to make a crochet bag that would be perfect for taking to a farmer's market. The last stop on our Tokyo yarn crawl is Amimono Spin, which is only a short walk away from the famous Shibuya Scramble. If you have only a short time to visit a yarn shop in Tokyo, I think this might be a really good choice if you only have time to visit one. And here's why. At this yarn shop, you will find a beautifully curated collection of yarn that you can only find there. And it is almost a distillation of what I saw as current trends in Japanese knitting. So there was reverence for specific breeds of wool. There was inclusion of texture. There was a lot of thought behind the selection of weights and colors of the specific yarns. And all these yarns were designed by the owner Miyuki, who I got to meet. The yarn is all manufactured in Japan to her specifications, and they are beautiful. Now, Miyuki, who is lovely, didn't speak much English, so we largely communicated with each other using Google Translate on our phones. And it was awfully fun to have a conversation through passing our phones back and forth. But this yarn is beautiful, and much of it was like yarn I'd never seen anyplace else. Amimono Spin also has a cafe, so if it's raining hard like it was the day we visited, you can plunk down with your knitting, have a cup of coffee. She has an amazing library of pattern books and knitting reference books there, although they're all in Japanese, so be warned. But you can tell that Miyuki is a very thoughtful yarn shop owner who is going for a great place to hang out and knit. She has classes there, and she's just oh so wonderful and helpful to speak to. I, of course, had to bring some of that yarn home with me. And let me show you what I got. I have 4 skeins each of these 2 colors of taco. So first of all, I think these, well, they're not bands, their labels are so cute with the little sheep and the cutouts. Anyway, so that is just entrancing. So taco is a blend of wool and alpaca, and it is super soft, but it is also this fuzzy chainette. I think there's also some silk in here. I'm going to make sure on the bottom of the screen that I put the content. I have never seen, at least in my perusal, a yarn that is similar to this. I've of course seen chainette before, but it's so soft, squishy, yet lofty. This screams to me something brioche. Not sure. I'm thinking maybe a brioche cowl or a brioche shawl. I have to calculate the yardage for that, but so pretty. So Tokyo is a town of over 20 million people. And of course, there are more yarn shops in Tokyo than the 4 I was able to get to. Morit was on my list, and I wasn't able to make it there. But suffice it to say, if you find yourself in Tokyo and want to visit a few yarn stores, you will not be disappointed. And in particular, you will find yarn there that you won't find at home, which is what makes it so much fun. And now, here is some more footage of my visit in Tokyo. You can't go to Tokyo without seeing the famous Shibuya Scramble.
stayed in Akihabara, which celebrates video games and manga. The electronics stores are unbelievable. Huge posters celebrating manga and anime characters are everywhere. Even police cars have cartoons on them. I loved the mix of old and modern architecture throughout Tokyo. This centuries-old Shinto shrine in Ueno Park is amazing. We got up early to go to the Kanda Myoshin shrine to see it before the tourists arrived. And while the locals did some early morning exercise, I took the opportunity to do some sketching. Tokyo's trains and subways network throughout the city and are particularly fun to see at night. The art aquarium installation in Ginza featured beautiful lit-up tanks of goldfish artfully arranged. I took so much more footage than I'm even showing here. On Saturdays, the main shopping district of Ginza is shut down so that shoppers can walk around unimpeded by traffic. For me, one of Ginza's main attractions is Atoya, a fabulous store of stationery, pens, and paper. Of course, Japanese food is so very yummy, and here the famous Japanese pancake known as okonomiyaki is made right in front of us. It's topped with mayonnaise and okonomiyaki sauce. And then the pièce de résistance are the bonito flakes, which float in the heat. And finally, some little herbs. But of course, there's yakitori and sushi.
And now it's time for some show and tell. So I am very pleased to say that I finally finished my husband's Gib II. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, this is a pattern by Andrea Mowry, and I knitted up in Hudson and West's Forge. So I mentioned in my previous episode, the one where I went to the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival, that the neck wasn't fitting quite right. I wasn't happy with the way it was laying, and that I was going to rip it back and re-knit the collar. Of course, one started with the collar and knit down, so I was going to have to run a needle through the bottom of the collar and then rip out the cast on and knit the neck on the way up. Well, that sounded really easy at the time. Let me first say that I'm very pleased with how this collar ended up. When we came back from Japan, I had my husband try on the sweater. He's happy with it, which is the most important thing. Um, and the collar does fit nicely and it lays nicely. But boy, had I known what a hot mess I was in for in ripping out that collar, I don't know if I would have done it. So I wish I had taken pictures, but I was kind of in the moment when I was working through it. So I did run a needle through the collar and I started trying to unravel the neck, but because of the short rows and because of the stickiness of the wool, that ended up being really kind of difficult to rip out. And I ended up having to take a scissors to it. And it got really messy and I had a hard time. Oh, and some stitches got dropped. And I mean, I went through a few episodes of panic, like, what have I done? I have ruined this sweater. But I worked through it, and I figured stuff out, and now it's really nice. So I don't think I would do that ever again if I can at all avoid it. And I'm saying to myself and to you, if you'd like to learn from my mistake, if you have an inkling that something is not turning out quite right, particularly if you're going top down, because if I really admit it to myself, I knew that that collar was turning out a bit loose and mushy. I should have ripped back and started over then. But instead, I knit the whole sweater and ended up having to go through a horror show of fixing it. I always say that a good project is one that you learn from. And I learned quite a few lessons from knitting this sweater. I have another finished object to share with you. Of course, when you're traveling, you've got a fair amount of airplane time and train time, and that can also mean a lot of good knitting time. And usually when I travel, I like to make socks because they're so portable. You can slip a little project bag in your purse. You don't have to drag around several skeins of yarn with you around wherever you're traveling. But I don't know, for whatever reason, I didn't feel like socks on this trip. And I thought to myself, why not knit a Japanese pattern? So this is the Horai scarf, and the designer is Hiroko Fukatsu. Now, I mentioned that I was looking at this pattern for my Rowan Kid Silk Haze collection that I talked about last winter. I will link to that episode below. But I actually had two skeins of hand-dyed mohair silk from the Knot House, a yarn shop in Frederick, which has now since closed. And I am so happy with that decision. This is a beautiful lace pattern. And I am so happy with the fuzzy, almost shimmery look to it from the play of the colors. And I'm very satisfied with how this project finished up. It's really addictive knitting. I haven't blocked it because I actually like the texture and the way it looks now. I don't know, blocking mohair silk can be interesting, shall I say? Just it's two strands held double, which gives it a nice thickness. This was so pretty to knit while I was in Japan, knowing that it was from a Japanese designer. So can't wait to tuck it around my neck under coats as soon as the weather turns chilly. My next work in progress is one, well, trying to decide if it's still going to be a work in progress. So if you have thoughts, please let me know. That would be really helpful to me. So I have been talking about for months how I want to knit James Watt's Earth and Air sweater. And in fact, I bought the yarn for this at Magpie Fibers. I have a couple skeins of their Swanky DK, and a skein of their Plume, which are both their. So this is the Plume, which is their cashmere silk lace weight boucle, and this is the Swanky DK. And I taught myself how to knit brioche specifically because I was so in love with this sweater that I needed to know how to do two-color brioche in order to knit it. So I cast this on with a lot of anticipation. Hasn't been easy from the beginning. I had to cast it on 3 times before I really was able to get the sweater going. And I have knit the body and cast off the center stitches for the neck. And I did one side of the front, and I made a big mistake on the other side of the neck, and I am going to have to rip back a few of these rows. And I have to truthfully say, I really haven't been enjoying the knit for a couple of reasons. The gauge is super loose, as you can see. It's knit on 10.5 US size needles, and it's really more of a stretchy mesh. And let me just say that if you drop a stitch and you don't realize it until like 10 rows up, fixing that is something. And this lace weight plume, this stuff is really easy to kind of miss. So just fixing mistakes has been a bit of a trial. And, yeah, I mean, lifelines help, but you have to move lifelines or put new ones in often enough. So even if something is 5 rows down, and your lifeline is, 15 rows down, it's still a bit of an operation to fix a mistake. And I think, so I aspire to be a decisive knitter. I'm either knitting something or I'm not knitting something. I don't like to have lots of whips hanging out there. It's just that's just I don't like to start things and not finish them. It makes me uncomfortable. That's just me. But I think I'm going to put this on hold, or I might frog it. I don't know what else I would use this yarn for because I bought it specifically for this sweater, this design. Maybe, I've heard of other knitters having what they call the naughty corner, where they just put things on hold for a while until they feel like picking it up again and fixing it. That's what I might do. But I'm also tempted just to frog it and be like, all right, this sweater's just not going to happen. It's okay. It's still beautiful yarn. You'll use it for something else. I don't know. What would you do if you were me? I honestly want your advice. Please let me know in the comments. So, when I realized that I wasn't going to be working on this a few days ago, I was itching for another cast on. And so I cast on a Tolsta tee. I think in March it was, or was it April? Anyway, Brooklyn Tweed was having its warehouse sale, and I picked up several skeins of its dapple, which is a wool and cotton blend. And I had originally thought that I would knit a pattern from Jared Flood from Brooklyn Tweed with this yarn. However, since then, the Tolsta tee by Rebecca Clow has come out, and I really wanted a nice raglan tee. The original pattern I was looking at was drop shoulder, and I have fairly wide shoulders, and I think raglans often look better than a drop shoulder on me. So that's what I have cast on. And I have gotten through the short rows on the back of the collar, or actually just below the collar, and now I am into knitting the raglan increases down the yoke. So one thing that Brooklyn Tweed recommends with dapple is that there can be pretty differences between skeins. In fact, I don't know if the camera picks it up, but this is a little bit darker than this one. So I haven't done it before, but I am alternating skeins, which is actually not that hard. I thought it would be kind of a pain, but you just pick up the next one and then you knit around and you pick up the next one. And I think it's worth it because I do believe that there would be color blocks, and you can, I don't know. I mean, there's a little bit of a stripy look, but I don't mind it. And I would prefer that kind of stripy look to something where it's like, oh, she changed skeins right there. That's where that line is. So that is my Tolsta tee, and I think that's shaping up to be a quick knit. Now, there's also been some spinning going on here, and just to give an update about that. Earlier in the year, I had set a goal for myself to really get comfortable spinning thin and consistently. And last fall in Vancouver Island, I had bought a sample set of merino and bamboo fiber. And now I have spun them all up. This I think was one of the best things I could have done, because altogether, I think this is about 4 to 6, I don't know. I should have waited, to be honest with you. I don't know how many ounces of Bambino, as they call the bamboo merino blend, but what was nice, because each sample was a different color scheme, I didn't get bored with the technique, but with each one, I felt more and more confident in my worsted spinning technique, and I have a lovely, consistent, fairly consistent fingering weight yarn here. And it's almost like I spun myself a set of minis. So in the fall, when all those patterns come out for things to do with your Advent minis, well, I have a set here, and I think this would be perfect for a lace shawl in a fingering weight. So anyway, very pleased with how this hand spun turned out. I really feel like I am becoming a more confident hand spinner. Which brings me to my current spinning project. Now I am focused all on becoming better at long draw, which is the woolen drafting technique for light and lofty yarns. So I have this wonderful roving I got at Avalon Springs Farm, which is in Maryland and local to me. This is called, I think the colorway is called Brooks and Trees, and it is a mixture of merino, polypay, alpaca, and mohair. And yeah, Avalon, well, that makes sense because Avalon Springs Farm has Angora goats on it. So a good source of mohair there. And it is, a nice strip of roving that the owner of Avalon Springs Farm pulled off her carter. And I am doing this whole bump of fiber I got, which is about 4 ounces, using supported long draw. And it's getting better. It is not as easy to do as short forward. You kind of have to, I don't know, you sort of have to trust your wheel, and it's a lot more about feel, but when you have long draw going, it is like magic. So I have spun one bobbin here of 2 ounces, and 2 ounces is going to go on the bobbin on my wheel, and then I will ply them up. But, I was able to do a nice, this is woolen spun, and it is a nice fine yarn. I don't know if you can appreciate it, but if the camera is picking it up, but anyway, I am making progress, and I just feel, as I said earlier this year, I'm just going to spin some more, spin again, not necessarily have a final project in mind, but just more focus on spinning to get confidence in the technique. So that's it for this edition of Yarn Journeys. If you found this episode fun, if you learned something, if you enjoyed it, please do hit that like button. It really does help folks like yourself find this content on YouTube. And do hit the subscribe button so you don't miss my next episode, which will be part 2 of my journey in Japan. And we'll be visiting Kyoto, Takayama, and Kanazawa. So I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching.